And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham-Pars incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Martin Willis, your host. And our guest this evening is Joan Bird from Montana. We'll be speaking to her, and it's going to be an interesting show. Before she comes on, we have Alejandro Rojas with the UFO updates. And I want to thank you if you support the show. And if you can't support the show and you still want to listen to the whole show, you can do that for free. All you have to do is listen on podcastufo.com every Wednesday night at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same as New York City. Or you can also listen on PSN Radio. And also, the show plays in full on the Dark Matter Digital Network every Thursday at 10 to midnight. That's also Eastern Standard Time. And that's about it for me. How you doing, Alejandro?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Doing great. I think I have my wits more or less about me now, I think.
You do?
More or less, yeah.
Good. That's really good to hear because I've been waiting for that for
a
years
long time. Thanks, man.
Yeah, so we'll see. I'll test your wits out.
Uh-oh.
I'm not sure how to do that. I'm not familiar with wit tests. I'm sure there are some.
Well,
but
I'm sure glad I didn't give you any time to prepare, so. And I do want to say, a lot of these shows that we have to do are pre-recorded, simply because of your schedule. But I also want to tell the listener that I never edit. I don't care how many mistakes. So it's just like a live show.
You don't?
I really don't. I'm sorry about that.
I thought you did sometimes, because sometimes I remember you'll be like, oh, I'm going to edit that out, especially if I tease you or when I do the awkward pause thing or something.
No, I haven't.
So I'm glad you don't, because I don't either, because it's more fun when you don't.
Yeah. Oh, you don't edit your whole show with your guests as well.
Very little stuff. I do edit out, mistakes or buzzes or sounds here and there type of things. And sometimes I will lose my train of thought or something, and I'll have to do a little bit of editing. But not very much. I do very little editing, so it has a live feel. There was even something you said on my show, and I was like, oh, man, I'm going to have to edit that out now. And I didn't.
You forgot about it. Oh, dear. Wow.
But I should one day, because I've got them saved, all of the comments that you make after and before the show, put those on the air.
Oh, that's good. Like bloopers.
Yeah, but it would be, it would not be family friendly.
No. Oh, no. Uh-oh. Not safe for work. Yeah.
Yep.
So what's happening in the UFO world?
Oh, there's some stuff going down, buddy. Before I get to the good story, there's three stories I want to talk about. They're pretty good, but the third story is the good one, the great one. So just to build that anticipation and to make sure that you allow me the time to get to the third story. But this first one, this is kind of fun. This is a video, another story from Roger Marsh, the director of the Mutual UFO Network, director of communications for the Mutual UFO Network, who also writes for us, and he writes about MUFON cases. He wrote about this video, and it's a video that this college kid took. He goes to Slippery Rock University in Pennsylvania, and one evening at about 10:27, he said he was inside doing his homework when he noticed something outside, a light. And he videotaped it. Now, he videoed through the window. So, as people have noted, there's kind of some, it's hard to make determinations because there will be some distortion. And, you can't make a whole lot out of this video. It's just a point of light kind of out there. You can't tell for sure what it is. But this is what's interesting, and is that this person, having seen this thing, has this theory, this student. He says, I actually have a theory. Here's the quote. I hypothesize that mathematically this type of dimensional projection can be explained by mapping from a four-dimensional vector plane, which is their reality, onto a three-dimensional vector plane, which is our reality, linear algebra transformations. This would allow an orb of possibly a higher dimension to travel to lower dimensions and be visible to us three-dimensional creatures.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
I wonder what he's studying. Wow, yeah. That is really interesting. And, there is talk in the UFO community. People do talk about possibly other dimensions and stuff like that. So it's really interesting when you hear people that are outside of the UFO community come up with an idea. That's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. What homework was he doing? He must have been doing his math homework, but that was kind of cool. So you have to check out the video. It's interesting, and, I can't say for sure what it is. People like Mark D'Antonio are looking into it, but it is hampered by going through the window there. But, interesting theory, huh?
Yeah, it is. It is. Wow. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope it's not one of these things where it's some type of light like we've seen so many times, flashing.
Well, there is. You might not have seen the video yet, but there is something that gives me a little bit of concern, and I don't know what would explain this, is that as the object moves in the video, if you zoom in and when you take the stills, you can see this kind of lighter area around the area it's moving in. And it doesn't move out of this kind of slightly, lighter than the background kind of area just around it. And that's really weird to me. So I don't know what that would be.
Okay, I'm watching it now, picture. And I see exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You have any
ideas? That is concerning. That's almost like something coming in from the back of the glass or something.
That's what I thought.
An interior light or some type of light source.
Yeah. And I thought maybe this elaborate hypothesis could be a hoax, that this person's just being funny, because it would be a bit of dry humor, but it would be someone like I would appreciate.
Okay. Well, yeah, it's a tough one, but I see exactly what you're talking about. It's like a light tone nearby.
Exactly.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I would like to hear what Mark D'Antonio has to say about it. However, the light does look like it's out somewhere, and there is a couple of flashes on it, too.
Yeah, and I'm not so sure it is inside a reflection, because it is a bright point of light.
Yeah, wow.
I don't know what the heck's going on here.
And the guy had me at hypothesize.
Yeah.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I love the hypothesization.
Yeah.
Maybe they should have a section for your hypothesis as to the nature, mathematical or otherwise, of the phenomena you witnessed. Another interesting video that we posted, and it's one of our social media videos. I love these. I think it's awesome. Michael Klein, our video guy, puts these together. He goes through our photo archives, and sometimes he finds some photos that aren't well known. I don't think people know about these photos that we posted. So he creates these little videos, and then we upload them on Twitter and on Facebook, so they play, embedded in those. We also put it on YouTube, and we make a story. But this is a fun one. These are some photos from Mexico, Cocoyoc, Mexico, from 1973, November 3rd, where four people were traveling north to Mexico City, and they inside the car, they saw this weird object. They thought it was a helicopter, but then it looked weird. They stopped, got out of their car. This guy had a camera. He started taking pictures with his 50 millimeter lens, and then he changed to a telephoto 135 millimeter lens to get pictures of this weird object. And they said this object kind of landed, and then they got freaked out and they took off. essentially. And this was looked at by a director for Kodak out in Mexico, and he didn't find any evidence of a fraud, but it's kind of a teardrop, inverted teardrop, kind of almost looking balloon type thing with these tentacles around it. You would think maybe it is a hot air balloon. Mm-hmm. In particular, I think it's the Purple People Eater hot air balloon. You can look that up if you haven't seen it. It's kind of similar to this. But there's no carriage or anything underneath it. So it's a really weird pictures. And, of course, this is before the time of Photoshop. So you have to check that out. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. I like the video that you did on that as well. Yeah, it looks sort of octopi-like.
Octopi. It is flying space octopi.
Yeah. Huh. Wow.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And it does, I would, if someone asked me to guess, which actually no one's asking me to guess, but I would say that it does look like a balloon, not necessarily a hot air balloon, only by the way it's shaped at the bottom of it and everything. But I would say that it looks like it could be some type of, like a parade balloon or something. Something very strange, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's weird stuff. Really weird.
Okay, let's hear the big one.
The big one. I'm glad you asked. So this is really cool. Some of you who follow UFO news, it's only been the last few days that this has kind of been out there. But a few days ago, the National Police Air Services in St. Athan, Wales, posted a video. It's reminiscent of the Puerto Rico FLIR video. It's this FLIR video that they got from the police helicopter of this object that they couldn't see with their eyes or with a normal camera, only with FLIR. Now, it was nighttime, but you see this round object in the film. What's cool about this is that they tweeted it, and they tweeted at the video. At least it's only it's a minute and 15 seconds. They say the entire video was 7 minutes, but they post and it actually is a video. It looks like one of the guys maybe took his phone and was filming the screen as it was playing, so he could tweet, a minute and 15 of this. Mm-hmm. And they say, and this is their official, police air services Twitter, they post any suggestion, nothing seen by local ATC, and they put a little alien face and some question marks. So people are like, wow, that's kind of weird, A couple of people said, well, could it be a balloon or something like that? And they said, well, the problem with that is it seemed to be going against the wind, and it's too hot because, of course, the FLIR registers heat. It's seeing the heat of this object, not like our eyes see. So because this is dark, it's some kind of hot object, which is weird. So they said, Chinese lantern. Well, they would have seen a Chinese lantern, but they couldn't see it with their eyes. In fact, they replied here, particularly to the balloon, only slight problem is the amount of heat, and it was traveling into the wind, ? They then said, they laughed and they said, a balloon with an engine and central heating. So this happened, they said, on Saturday, which would have been not this past Saturday, but the Saturday prior at 21:30 hours. And it was over the Bristol Channel, they said, at approximately 1,000 feet. So I'm writing the story on this right now. That's about all they said. Because it's only on this Twitter, and it's getting news out there, especially in the UK, but it's starting to kind of leak over here. So I have a FLIR expert connection, and this is through the Puerto Rico video. Some of you may remember that I interviewed a FLIR expert to see what his thoughts were. And he commented on this, and I'm writing the story with his comments. He agrees that it's weird. He says you can definitely rule out a balloon or a bird. He doesn't think it was a Chinese lantern. He disagrees a bit in that he thinks, which is still strange, he thinks that the object is stationary. Of course, it looks like it's moving, but like Mark D'Antonio has pointed out, when a helicopter or plane is flying around an object, the background is moving, but it doesn't mean the object is.
Right.
So this guy is an expert on this exact type of system. And he's like, this is funny because I work on these systems on a regular basis. And he says this is weird. He doesn't know what it is. He can't figure it out at all. He thinks it's strange, too, which is interesting because those air services police probably look at these videos a lot, just like Dave, the expert I am talking to, also looked at them. So this is really mysterious. So I'm actually writing this story now. I'll have it up. I'll probably have it up by the time the show airs so people can see it on our front page. But you'll have to check out this video. Have you seen it yet?
No, I have not. You did?
Okay.
Yeah. Is it available on YouTube as well?
I don't believe so. I wouldn't doubt if by now someone hasn't uploaded it to YouTube, but I'll have it embedded in our story momentarily. And actually, if you just look NPAS St. Athen, you'll be able to find it because those are the people who posted it.
Wow, excellent. Okay, so you can find all these stories we talked about on openminds.tv, as well as a link in our show notes. And speaking of our show notes, we have our guest, Joan Bird, who's coming up. We have her full bio right in our show notes.
Dr. Joan Bird, even.
Yes, I was going to say she got her PhD in West Indian finches, which is interesting. So she's from Montana, and she has studied zoology, and she has a great book called Montana, UFOs, and Extraterrestrials. And we're going to be talking about that. We're going to be talking about her interview with some sheriffs in Montana and a lot more coming up. Thanks so much, Alejandro. We'll be talking to you next week.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
All right. Hang in, everyone. We'll be right back after the quick music break with Joan Bird. Well, hello, Joan. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Martin. Glad to be here.
Yes, thank you. We actually met out in Phoenix. I think it was it last year or the year before? Time's slipping away.
Wait, I'm sorry, but you'll not be able to get me to remember what year it was. They kind of blur together after a while.
Oh, God, I'm not alone. Anyway, I had someone that helps out with the show. Peggy, she helps out with our Facebook page, posting every single day. She either read your book or something when it came out. I think it was in 2012, and you and I had just kept missing each other, and finally, hurrah! Here you are.
Good. Yes. Yeah. Well, there was a lot of flurry of activity after the book came out, and there was only so much I could deal with at a time. So lately, things have slowed down a little bit. Although I'm still doing a fair amount of speaking and enjoying speaking around the state. Oh. So anyway, I try to keep it to a dull roar. I just
yeah. One of the things I want to talk about a little bit later is one of the most fantastic UFO pieces of footage in Montana around the water tower. I've seen that. I've looked at that for a number of years, and I want to talk about that. But before we get into anything, if you would, can you tell the listener who's not familiar with who you are, how you got interested in this subject and your background and all that, if you would?
All right. I'll try not to take too much time here.
We have plenty of time.
Okay. Well, yes, I am a scientist by training, and I was very interested in animals and in ecology and in animal behavior. So that was what my degree was basically in. But I did work on birds, on inter-island variation in birds, so I'm steeped in orthodox evolutionary theory and ecological theory. That was my background. I say to some people I'm still recovering from it.
Mm-hmm.
But that is my background, and I come from a family with a lot of respect for science. My father was an aeronautical engineer, and I have a brother who is a physicist. And so
Wow.
in my family, if you wanted to amount to anything, you needed to be a scientist. That was, these were the people that were taking us forward. So that was part of my initial endeavor to stay in the science field, even though I had more of an interest in nature and the outdoors, and in the end was more interested in being, I guess, kind of a conservation activist than I was in being an academic. But it was good training, and it gives me a good ability to assess the validity of things and to think critically, and I'm very grateful for that. And it also enabled me to be able to speak science, and that is helpful in communicating with people that come from that realm. So I've always been interested in things that are unexplained, and as I say in my book, part of the reason for that is that my mother was a near-death experiencer, and she had this experience when I was 13 and told me about it a couple of months after it happened, when she got better from closed heart surgery, which had a 50% survival rate back in 1962 when that happened. So I just knew that there were things out there that our current understanding of a materialistic universe did not explain, that divide between spirit and matter. So I always kind of kept track of those things that didn't quite fit.
Would you mind, I know this is a show about UFOs, but would you mind just briefly going into what your mother did experience?
Okay. No, I don't mind. I enjoy sharing it. And I have to say that whenever she did share it, it was so moving to her that it always brought tears. And I don't know why this is, but that often happens to me too when I talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Her mother had died 6 months previously, and so she experienced a tunnel and a light at the end of the tunnel, and traveling down this tunnel. And mind you, this was long before Moody's Life After Life came out.
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard of anything like this. Neither had she. When she came to the other end of the tunnel, she came into this place with this brilliant light. Her mother met her. She talked about seeing another figure that she didn't know. She said, maybe it's Jesus, I don't know. But there was this luminous figure there, and she said, I have never felt so completely immersed in love. And the music was incredibly beautiful. She said, I have never felt so loved and so at peace, and I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay there, but I knew that you and your sister needed me. So I decided that it wasn't time for me to go. Wow.
It's really interesting. I said this is a show about UFOs, but I've heard of so many of these accounts that it is just more of the unexplained, and I could definitely see why that sparked your interest. So how did it jump over to? Was UFOs just part of these things you were looking into?
Well, it was actually the crop circles that kind of got my attention. I'd been working in conservation for a number of years and was starting to do more writing, and I had just gotten wind that there'd been these crop circles that had happened up in northwestern Montana near Kalispell, between Kalispell and Whitefish. And I'd cut out a newspaper article. Actually, it was just a photo, nothing more, and it didn't really show. It wasn't not an aerial photo, so you couldn't really see any shape of the crop circle. But I was talking to a friend of mine who was a magazine publisher, and she said, well, if you write an article on that, then I'd probably publish it. Well, that'd be interesting to research. So I started looking into this, and this was in early 1999, and that first crop circle, I am relatively sure was man-made. I wasn't able to see it when it happened. It happened in August, and I don't think I saw the newspaper article until September, and it was long gone by then. It had been harvested. But when I spoke with the reporters and also the farmer, whom I happened to know because I had done environmental work up in the Flathead and had worked with a lot of the farmers about preservation of ag land and things like that, I talked to him about it, and he said, he just thought it was pranksters. And there was a lot of evidence pointing in that direction. Mm-hmm. But in the next year, in August of 1999, there was another crop circle that formed about 5 miles from that initial one. And by that time, a number of us had become aware of the BLT research team, the crop circle research team, mm-hmm. and the analysis that they were doing on mm-hmm. plants and the electromagnetic anomalies that they were experiencing in the crop circles. So there were people on the ground who were able to get plant samples from that 1999 crop circle that showed some of the anomalies that Nancy Talbot had told us about. Mm-hmm. And also they experienced some of those failures of cameras, dead batteries, compasses going wacky, all of those kinds of things in the second crop circle. And it was very similar to the first crop circle, but with some differences that almost like it was a reply. And I know that sometimes happens, and I had been learning that in looking at the crop circle phenomenon, it's important to know what was in that field the year before and what else is happening in other fields around it. You can't look at just one crop circle by itself. And in fact, in my book, I called it Cereal Mystery, with because it's usually in cereal crops, but also because you have to look at what, there's often the rest of the story comes later. So, so that looked to me like it was a commentary on the first one. And then the following year, there were 2 crop circles that happened within 2 weeks' time in the same field. And again, the electromagnetic anomalies, the same kinds of changes in the plant structure that made us believe that those were at least not man-made. Something else was doing them and we didn't know what. And I was fascinated by what I was learning online about the crop circles in England and paying a lot of attention to try to understand what was happening there. And my husband came in one night. He happened to be driving late at night and the radio, and he had Coast to Coast on. Not like he was a regular listener. He just happened to, be dialing across the radio and started hearing this interview with Linda Moulton Howe. And I had no idea who she was, but he came in and he said, there's a woman talking about crop circles on the radio. So he turned it on, and she had a new book out, Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2. I ordered the book. The book came. It wasn't about crop circles. The first chapter was all about UFOs, and it was military witnesses, and one of those witnesses was Robert Salas, talking about the deactivation of the nuclear missiles with UFOs hovering over the launch control facility. And I was blown away, and I was so impressed by the credentials of these military witnesses and what they had seen and their testimony about the cover-up as well as what they had seen, that it just blew my mind. And I felt like a door had opened in a wall that I didn't even know was there. Wow.
That's really great. So has any of your family, what do they have to say about your exploring this topic?
They love me, and I think that I have a sister and a brother that are pretty much okay with this. I had an aunt who was outrageously supportive because her brother had been in the Strategic Air Command when everybody on the plane that he was the pilot for had a long-term UFO witness of a UFO flying along the plane. My brother, I think he would still call himself a skeptic. Because of the field that he's in. He's a planetary physicist. He's actually working on the New Horizons project, which was a project that went out to Pluto. Yeah. So in the world that he lives in, which has a very narrow focus, he doesn't. It would not really behoove him at this point to delve too deeply into this, but he pays attention to it. And actually, one of his German colleagues, because he lives in Germany and works for the German government in their space program, was interested enough to read my book, and my brother read it very carefully and was an excellent editor for every little typo that could be found, and actually was very helpful. But I just have to tell one quick story. He had a project on board the Cassini mission that went to Saturn, and then there was a probe on it called the Huygens probe that went to the moon, Titan.
Mm-hmm.
And his experiment was to measure the wind on Titan.
Wow.
And yeah, and they have to. I mean, they plan this for years and years, and
Right.
then they launch, and then they've got to wait for 7 years and just hope nothing goes wrong. And as they were coming into close proximity, somehow NASA had not managed to turn on the two sensors they needed to get the Doppler effect, to get the data. And there was, they were like, no, this can't be happening. But in the end, they were able to get it. He was able to measure the wind speed, and he was interviewed by the San Francisco Chronicle, and he was just jubilant. And he said to them, "This is my salute to the Titans, if they exist." It cracked me up because he was just being funny, but I thought that it reflected to some extent his sister's influence as well.
Yeah. I know just last Monday, NASA had an announcement about geysers on Europa.
Oh, boy.
But it's just they still don't have anything definitive, and they kind of do this thing where they have a quote unquote this big announcement, big press conference, and it's all fascinating. It's interesting. It's very, very cautious, and that's what I see mostly. I'm sure your brother is the same way. Everyone just is very careful. I totally understand. You don't want any news to go out there that can be disproven or anything like that. But I wonder if he would be open-minded enough to speculate that there may be physics out there that we have not thought of that could get someone from there to here. Because I think it's very possibly happening, and I've heard your take on that as well. So that's the one thing that scientists or someone like him have a really hard time with, the energy involved to get from even the nearest star to here or anywhere else in the galaxy or universe. To get to here, it just seems impossible, along with the time that it would take, to travel.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever had any of those conversations with him?
That was the first conversation we had, actually. When I first told him that I was going to be writing this book and wanted to talk to him about it, his comment was, well, it's physically impossible. There's no way they could get here from there. And that is oftentimes the pat answer. When I do a talk, I actually spend a little time talking about all of the scientific statements that have been made in the past that turned out to be lacking in humility, shall we say, about the degree to which there are things that we don't know. And so that's one of the things that I like to talk about is there are some amazingly silly things that people have said that are a little bit laughable now, but
and people have died for those things. There's you look at Galileo under house arrest, the last part of his life, because he was thinking that we revolved around the sun instead of the other way around. Pretty amazing.
Yeah.
I understand. A person of science, like I said, has to be very careful, and they have to use logic. But it is interesting to hear someone like you, perhaps not studying the same type of science as your brother, but still you're open-minded enough to really take this topic seriously. Mm-hmm. I appreciate that.
I have that, that side of me. It's an interesting story about my father I could relate to maybe here. But I just wanted to also say I recently sent out to my UFO email list a report on Juno and the Juno mission going to Jupiter and how it was going to be looking at the largest moons and getting more information about them. And I had remembered one of the things I really enjoy doing is reading the books that have been written by people that say that they are contactees. And there's a very interesting book, I think it's called The Invitation by Sixto Paz Wells, in which he says that there is a group of ETs who are resident on Ganymede, which is one of the largest moons of Jupiter, and that there are a number of large cities on that moon. So I just wanted to share that information. You know, those are two very different sources. But I track both of them, maybe because I do have this, you know, sort of double lineage. I'm willing to listen to those sources that claim to be witnesses, that claim to have had contact experiences, but at the same time, I have this science mind that appreciates that kind of an approach as well. And they're two different categories of information, but sometimes they come together in very interesting ways.
Mm-hmm. I've said many times on this show that it's, you know, we may never know the answer, but it's fun to explore the mystery. That's why I'm here every week. And also, there's just so many, I think there's so many things we don't have a clue about, not just this, but just many, many things that we just can't explain or have any clue to what they are. Going back, you just mentioned your mailing list. I'm on your mailing list. Can you tell the listener how they can get on that? Because you send out some really fascinating emails. That's how we reconnected.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, you can just email me at joanruthbird@gmail.com, spelled just like it sounds.
Uh-huh. And also, you have a website. I have that all in the show notes, so anyone can check.
That's true, too. Yeah, that's another way that people can contact me. Mm-hmm. I really need to work on getting a better website, but that's one of my goals for the year.
Someone asked we have a message board, and they wanted to know what was the name of that book. I think he's talking about the one that Linda Moulton Howe.
Oh, Linda Moulton Howe has Glimpses of Other Realities, Volume 2.
No, that's not it. Did you have, and I probably just missed this, a book, Invitation or something like that?
Yes. Yeah, The Invitation by Sixto Paz Wells.
Oh, okay. All right. So that's what they wanted to know.
He's Peruvian. Yeah.
Oh, I got it. Okay. This is the book you were talking about the contactee?
Right. The one that wrote about this group that he called the Rama Mission, that he said that he was working with, and he said that they were actually training and preparing to assist the Earth through a very difficult passage.
Well, yeah. We're doing that now, going through the election.
No kidding.
Sorry, I don't want to ever talk politics, but oh boy.
Yeah.
So anyone who's listening live, you can jump in the chat room and ask our guest a question. Also, if you'd like to call in, we do take calls, and you could call now, or toward the second part of the show would be better, and that number is 603-967-4030. One of the cases I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you've looked deeply into it, and it's in your book, and that's what's called the Montana UFO, the one that's so famous. Can you tell the listener that perhaps is not familiar with that film about it, please?
Yes. That film was taken in 1950 when not a lot of people were carrying around cameras. And it just so happened that Nick Mariana, who was the business manager for a baseball team in Great Falls, Montana, was out looking at the baseball field and looking for the groundskeeper to talk to him about something when he saw these spinning silvery discs come in from the north, hover by a smokestack for the Anaconda Copper Company. He was astonished at what he saw, but he could see two spinning silvery discs, and he happened to always carry a camera in his glove box. So he went dashing for his car, yelled for his secretary to come out and look, grabbed the camera, and started shooting. And my understanding is that when he first started shooting, that the two objects were still very close, and you could still see that they were spinning silvery discs. However, when he gave that film, over to the Air Force and Air Force intelligence, when they found out about it, they paid him a little visit, and actually there is a letter that's been declassified in the files giving the orders to the intelligence officer to do his best to try to get his hands on that film. And they had it for about 2 weeks, and when they gave it back, Mariana and many of his friends, whom he had shown the film too, said that the best footage had been taken.
Oh.
Nevertheless, the footage that remains, which is at quite a distance, so probably somebody thought that it could be explained away as aircraft. There have been all these analyses done on it, and it's been brought up in all of the government investigations of UFOs, beginning with Project Grudge and Blue Book and the Condon report. And none of them were able to explain it. Project Grudge tried to write it off as planes, but then Ed Ruppel, when he did Blue Book later, he said there's no way it could be planes. He looked into that and dismissed that entirely. And in the end, there was a wonderful study that was published in the Journal of Astronautical Science, I believe it's called, Astronomical Science, by a man named Baker. And what he said was that there was no way it could be planes because he knew how fast our fastest planes were. And even though he couldn't judge the absolute speed of the two silver discs going by, they had relative speed because they could see them going behind the grain elevator and the water tower. So if they knew how far away they were, then they'd be able to figure out what the speed was. Well, he knew that if they were close enough, that the speed that they were traveling at could have been the top speed of the jet aircraft that they had at that time, that they would have had to be close enough that you could tell they were jet aircraft. And the fact that they were these fuzzy balls of light, essentially, in the distance, meant that they were going too fast for them to be any kind of aircraft that we knew about. So it's kind of hard to explain, but it's a very definitive analysis, and I kind of feel like that's the last word on the Mariana UFO film, which anybody can look up. All you have to do is search Montana UFO film or Mariana UFO film, and you can see that film and an excerpt from a wonderful documentary that was done in 1956 just called UFOs.
Yeah, that film, like I said, that's one of the real good ones, and I had no idea that the first part of that film was missing, and what a shame. And just to think that there is somewhere where these films are sitting right now, whether they're preserved, or destroyed. That could be, like for instance, off the California coast when that test missile went up, and there was that thing that went around and zapped it. There's all these films that have been confiscated, and I just wonder where they all are.
Yeah, there are quite a few. When I started looking into it, this was not an isolated case. There were a number of cases where that happened, and the other film that was so interesting to the Robertson panel that Blue Book trotted out as some of their best evidence, the Utah film, the Navy photographer who took that photo, he said that they gave him back a poor copy of it. They did not give him back the original film either. So,
what a surprise! Have you seen? I guess it's the video "A Field Full of Secrets."
I haven't.
You haven't? Oh, okay. There was someone put that up on the message board. I guess it's most likely it's about crop circles. Mm-hmm. And okay, so that case, that's just one of those that it's just too bad you can't see the discs spinning anymore like the original footage. You could, but it's still just a great piece.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's so rare that someone could actually grab a camera that quickly and get it going.
It's interesting because he was a graduate of the journalism school at the University of Montana. And in Montana, we're very proud of the journalism schools. It was one of the first in the country, and it's still recognized as being one of the best journalism schools anywhere. So they are trained in getting to the truth and being available to report things. And the story goes that he had happened on a train wreck one time when he first got his camera, and then it ended up being on the nightly news. So he always carried it with him ever after that because he never knew when something noteworthy might take place. So there he was.
Yeah.
Johnny ready.
I don't know if you're familiar with Ray Stanford, but he never leaves his house. He's mentioned this to me a bunch of times. Never leaves his house without a camera. And I went to him to Goddard Space Center, and from his house, it's only a few minutes away, and he had his camera with him, always ready. Which I think, and a lot of people have mentioned this, that they didn't even think of taking a film or a picture, and that never crossed my mind when I had my one really good sighting. I'd never even thought of grabbing. I would now. I think I would. Yes, I know I would, for sure.
So many people say that they're just so
mesmerized.
That they don't respond in a normal way.
Right. This question came in from an email from Bill, and he had one about crop circles, but you more or less addressed that. This one is, what can you share about cases of UFOs and nuclear missile silos, especially cases of not just missiles being deactivated, but cases of them being activated both in the former USSR and the U.S.?
Well, those are the most alarming situations, are they not? And there have been a couple of them that I know of, and maybe there are more. But the first one was actually in 1966 at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota. And we knew about that. We knew that there had been UFOs sighted. We knew that there were technical failures. But what we didn't realize was that they had been put into launch mode, and it was only in 2007 when a witness came forward. I think his name is David Scher, and said, yeah, this is what happened, that they were lit up and they were getting ready for launch mode, and we had to shut them down because we knew that we had not gotten the order to do that. And then the other really famous one is the one that took place in the Ukraine in a town that I can't pronounce, but they said it was south of Kiev. And at that point in time, it was during when the USSR was still intact in 1982, and there were a number of high-ranking Soviet witnesses that after Glasnost came forward, and they actually gave signed testimony about what they had seen and what they had experienced. And I think one of them was a colonel in the Soviet Air Force who was in a launch control facility very similar to Robert Salas when there were all of these UFOs that were being sighted above the ground. Many witnesses were seeing UFO activity zigzagging around like an air show, really, when the dials for the missiles went into launch mode. Now, in 1982, the targets of those missiles, of course, would have been Montana, Washington, D.C., all those places. And many of the witnesses talked about how terrifying it was.
And Montana because of nuclear silos as well?
Right, yeah. We always say, well, the fact that they were trying to hide the nuclear missiles here in Montana just, of course, made us the bullseye for the launch of any Soviet missiles. So, yeah. Anyway, it's all very sobering, and especially now because it seems like, we don't seem to be much better off in terms of nuclear threat than we were then.
No, I don't know what the answer to that. I think the threat is just growing when these threatening countries are getting, closer and closer to developing something. I think it's pretty scary. It's one of those things that can't be undone. It's too bad that the whole nuclear thing could just not be undone and not exist, but it's here, and we have to deal with it. And then, one of the people I had on the show was an astrophysicist, former NASA visiting scientist, who said that his quote that I love, and I've said it a few times on the show, is that if a civilization can get through the bottleneck of technology without blowing themselves up, they'll be traveling the stars. And that's where, we have to get through that bottleneck without blowing ourselves up or destroying ourselves in other ways.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that I am very interested in reading the literature from the contactees and from the ETs, and why I was so fascinated by Leo Dvorak and Yuta Wartna, because it seems that the beings that they had contact with did somehow get through that. And so we clearly have things to learn from them. And there is one case, I was just trying to remember what the name of it was. It was part of Wendell Stevens' collection of contact experiences, and it took place in Holland. And there was a businessman that actually, on a boat, he nearly collided with a submersible. I guess, what do we call them? Unidentified submersible objects.
Yeah, USO. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. And he ended up writing a book which he published as fiction, although he always claimed that it was not really fiction. And he was, of course, all keen on finding out what kinds of advanced technologies they had. And their response to him was, the last thing that you humans on Earth need is any more advanced technology, that your social systems and your moral behavior are what need to be increased, because you have outstripped your ability to socially accommodate the kinds of powers and weapons that you have developed, and it's a great concern to all of us.
Yeah. It's too bad they don't grow in unison, They just don't. Our social aspects along with our technology. Going back to nukes, because I think that topic's fascinating. I've spoken to Robert Hastings a number of times about this as well. Mm-hmm. What do you think that's all about? That's them. There's many, many cases that have to do with nuclear weapons.
Yes. Well, I tend to agree with Robert Salas. I think that they are just letting us know that this is not the right path. There have been so many cases where they have interfered. I've actually heard some people say, well, maybe for all we know, they've neutralized all of them. I don't know, how do you test to know whether a nuclear missile is still functional?
Whatever you could test, if they have that capability, they could get around the testing. In other words, a false negative.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know, but that tends to be because part of the reason that I think that is probably true is because at the same time, and even earlier before that, we have a number of the contactees telling us that the ETs that they were in communication with were saying that they were trying to talk us out of development of these weapons and trying to see if they couldn't encourage a different direction of development on the planet. So that seems to jive with what it looks like. I mean, they could have done much worse, and now this information has come out about the scientist that has come up with evidence that there may have been nuclear explosions on Mars. You know about that?
I have heard something about that. I haven't looked into it at all. Another interesting take, but I don't know how someone, how did he come up with that? Do you know?
Yes, and I actually, where I heard about this was from Richard O'Connor at the UFO Library, and who meets almost every Tuesday night, and he does a wonderful job of bringing us a lot of the latest information. And he was very impressed by this discovery. And this man actually had a paper that was accepted at a recent, I think of Aeronautics and Astronautics organization that had a recent annual meeting. Mm-hmm. And his paper was somehow analyzing different elements in the atmosphere of Mars and the elements that he was identifying there. And here, I'm not going to be able to remember the name of those, but there were certain isotopes or certain elements that he was finding in the atmosphere that he said could not have gotten there if there had not been nuclear explosions.
I wonder if there's anything that can naturally mimic a nuclear explosion. I know that sounds probably way out there, but I always like to look at what could be a natural cause first before. I kind of like also. I'm not a scientist in any type of way at all, but I do like, to look at all aspects.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a good question. It's an important question, and I imagine that he has addressed it. I haven't looked at the paper, but I was impressed by the fact that it was accepted.
Really? Wow. Yeah.
At a serious, science
peer
conference.
Reviewed. Wow.
Yeah, peer reviewed.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah.
So just to tell the listener, it's almost at the top of the hour. In hour two, I do want to talk to you about the interview you were involved with the sheriffs in Montana. But are there any other, and maybe the sheriffs as part of this, but is there any other major sighting besides the nuclear silos and also the Montana film that you can talk about that has happened in Montana that's not so well known, or all the major ones fairly well known?
Well, I mean, I get sighting reports all the time. It's one of the reasons I love traveling around the state to these small rural communities and asking people if they've had sightings and doing my best to take notes and record them. And most of them are lights in the sky, but I have had a number of people that have reported landings. And there are some very interesting sightings that are reported in Mystery Stalks the Prairie, which was Keith Wolverton's book. He was the co-author along with Roberta Donvan. And the last couple of chapters, most of the book is about the cattle mutilations. Not my favorite subject. I thought about doing a chapter on it, but he really covered it well, and that's still an excellent book, and there's a possibility that it may be republished. But I think that you can actually access a copy of it online on Linda Moulton Howe's website. You may have to join her earthfiles.com to get access to it, but she was able to get it put up there. And there are some amazing accounts in there of UFOs as big as hotels landing in pastures out there on the East Rocky Front, not far from Great Falls, not far from the nuclear missiles.
Yeah. Yes, Montana, someone just made we have a listener from Australia on the chat room, just looked at pictures and said Montana looks like such a beautiful place. And it is. I have been through it, and all I can remember from back in the 80s when I went through it was that it's just big open skies and, some beautiful formations. And so in that case, I always think of people that have big open skies must have more sightings, because I'm in the state of Maine. There's a lot of trees. There's a lot of trees right along the East Coast, so a lot of tree cover. But
right.
So would you say that, I don't know how Montana rates as far as sightings go, but would you say there's a good deal of them compared to a lot of the country?
I just don't know how to answer that. I mean, one of the problems in Montana is that we don't have a lot of people. And it seems to be the case that states with larger populations have more sightings. So, there are a lot of different factors that contribute to how many UFOs are seen. But we do have a lot of people in rural areas. It's very much a rural state, and so you have people that are outside a lot and people that are having to be out at night. So I think that may increase the possibilities. And it does seem like there have been a lot of sightings here. There are sightings going back to cowboy days.
That was one of my questions. I was going to ask you if you were aware of what the earliest sighting was in Montana.
Well, there is this one. I think that was from 1913 or something, from some cowboys way up around Glasgow or somewhere like that. But then there's the very mysterious Cadott Pass report, which might be a meteorite, but are you familiar with that? Have you ever heard of that one?
No, I have not. I'd like to hear about it.
Well, it's a possible UFO crash. And the man who reported it was Jim Lumley, reported it in, I think it was 1865, but I don't hold my feet to the fire on that date. And he had seen it the year before because he was a trapper and was trapping in the headwaters of the Missouri River, he said, in the vicinity of Cadott Pass, whatever the heck that meant. And what he said was that at night he saw this large, brilliant object moving east across the sky that exploded into pieces. And then he heard this crash, and the ground shook and could smell sulfur. And what he said was he wouldn't have thought too much about it. He would just have decided it was a meteorite or something. But the next day, when he went out to check his trap lines, he came across this swath of destruction that was, I think he said, several rods wide. And a rod is 14 feet, as I recall. So we're talking a big swath of destruction, and he followed it until he said he found a stone lodged in the mountain. And he said the stone was compartmented and that there was strange writing on it that looked something like Egyptian hieroglyphs, and that at the base of the stone on the ground there was something that looked like glass and also seemed to be wet.
Wow.
So when you look into meteorites, one of the first things you learn is that meteorites do not ever have holes in them. So when he talked about it having compartments, this is, raises some interesting questions.
Uh-huh.
He said that he thought that the marks on it had to be man-made, that they looked like they had been incised. So sometimes meteorites have strange, funny little marks on them, but he seemed to be convinced that it was some kind of writing. He didn't mention the possibility of it being extraterrestrial. He thought it was, there was some human source. And the glass, oftentimes when meteorites hit the ground, you get the formation.
Yeah.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that's explainable. The liquid, maybe not so much. So anyway, it's a puzzle. I spent some time kind of combing over the area and trying to figure out from his description where it might be. I've worked a little bit with dowsers. If it's ever going to be found, it would have to be with somebody that has really good intuitive skills, because that area now is, a lot of it is very thickly wooded and has very thick undercover, so that if something were, even if it wasn't completely buried, even if it was above the ground, still being able to see anything would be very difficult. But I think there are probably ways that could be done, and there have been people that have looked for it. Maybe ground-penetrating radar or something like that would enable us to find it. But wouldn't that be fun if we were to find a crashed UFO up at Cadott Pass?
Right. Did he talk at all about the approximate size of what it was?
I think he said large.
Okay. Yeah, I mean...
It's written up in this St. Louis newspaper, and it's really a very interesting account. And it's easy to find Cadott Pass UFO crash or something like that.
How do you spell that, just out of curiosity?
Oh, Cadotte.
Okay, just for the listener that may want to check it out. Cadott Pass.
Yeah. A lot of people have thought about it, and a few of them have rummaged around up there. But in the vicinity of, when you're a trapper out there, and there wasn't much in the way of roads, it's kind of tricky to figure. But who knows? I occasionally think about rounding up a bunch of dowsers and seeing if we can't make some headway on that one.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, let's see. We're just getting into the second hour. If anyone would like to call in, you're welcome to give a call and ask our guest a question. And that's 603-967-4030. You can also Skype in, too. We had someone do that last week, or one or two people. And that's my username is Marty Willis. That's MartyWillis. And so this is fun. I'm enjoying this conversation. And we have some more questions that were emailed in. This one also is from Bill. Do you believe we are being visited by multiple groups of ETs with possibly different agendas?
I do. I totally do. Yeah, I just think that we can't explain. Well, there's so many witness accounts of descriptions of different kinds of beings. And I think that's part of the confusion, is a lot of people want to say, well, what is their intention? What is their agenda? I think there is not one. There are many. And there are a number of different people that have talked about that. Corey Good's interviews with the Secret Space Program, he talks about all the different kinds of agendas. I just think the fact that we have crop circles and we have cattle mutilations, we have reptilian beings reported, we have praying mantis beings reported, we have many reports of beings that look human. We have variations of grays. I just don't think that I just think we have a lot of different civilizations that have visited here historically, and I think that a lot of them are still here. I just finished a very interesting book called Voices of the Cosmos. Do you know about that one?
No, Joan, would you mind taking a call? We do have one coming in.
Okay.
All right. And hopefully I did this right. Caller, can you hear me? Caller, can you hear me? Can you hear me, Joan?
I hear you.
Okay. It shows the callers here. I tried to join the two together, and perhaps that's not, it's not working correctly. Can you hold just 1 second? And I'm going to just see what I can do. I sure don't want to lose you. But yeah, for some reason the call's just not coming through, and something changed on Skype because there's a new thing that's showing instead of the plus. There's something else. So I'm not sure if I clicked the right button. So, caller, unfortunately, we can't hear you, and perhaps you're having a mic issue, or I'm not sure if you're hearing the radio show in the background, but unfortunately, we can't hear you. All right, I'm going to try one more time. Here we go. Okay, caller, can you hear me?
Yep.
There you are. How are you?
Yep.
What's your name and where are you
John
calling
Tackett.
from? Oh, John, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good, actually.
And Joan, can you hear us still?
Yes.
Okay, great. So do you have a question for Joan?
Yeah, actually, I do. I was kind of fascinated by the idea of what her perspective is initially on how long ago you think in our history do you think we've been visited?
Oh, my heavens.
Potentially.
I think it's been going on a very long time.
I do too.
Maybe since before humans evolved. I don't know. I just think that they've been here for a long time.
You never suspect they might have helped us evolve?
I think it's possible, or been involved in some way. I do think that what we have heard about genetic engineering, what we're learning about genetic engineering, and what we're hearing from some of the contactees and some of the other sources of information, that they have been involved in bringing different genetics here and possibly bringing other species here as well, bringing some kinds of plants for food and other things to help life evolve here on Earth. I think it's all possible. It's very hard to prove, but it makes sense.
That was something I always suspected, because the differential between Neanderthal and us, so it's kind of fascinating. There's a break off there. I was kind of always wondered what happened. It's almost like somebody kind of took hold and evolved us to a specific degree to their needs.
Yeah, well, that's certainly what Zechariah Sitchin says in his books. I don't know if you've read any of his books, but he claims that the Sumerians were actually colonists.
I have. Yeah, I have.
Yeah. And I think that he makes a good case that that's possible. So
it's fascinating. It is kind of fascinating because the way we evolved. Now, if you think about this, what fascinates me is within the last 200 years, we went from being on a horse to going to the moon.
Yes. Yeah.
Explain that.
Yeah.
I've heard an exponential perception or theory, but that's ridiculous.
So you think that the ETs may have been nudging us?
Or we may have reverse engineered something we got a hold of.
Also possible.
Which I would not put past our government.
Well, I actually met a man who worked for Sandia Labs, and he was a laser physicist, and he came up to me after a talk I gave and told me that he had worked at Sandia Labs. I said, "You know a lot, don't you?" And he looked right back at me and he says, "Yes, we did back engineer."
Really? Wow. That's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, it was.
How about that?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
All right, John. Well, hey, thanks for calling in, John.
I appreciate it, buddy. I always love talking to Martin. Martin, I love your show. This is the best show ever was. All right, you take care, buddy.
All right, thanks a lot.
All right.
Yeah.
Hey,
all right,
bye.
Bye-bye. Getting back to, there was some other questions, and someone wanted to know what you can share about early contactee experiences with human-looking ETs in the 1930s and 40s. Now, you've kind of been touching on that already.
Right. Those are the two cases. They're the last two chapters in my book. And that was one of the things that made me really want to write a book about things that have happened in Montana, because there are not those kinds of accounts, not that many of those kinds of accounts out there. And I just felt like we were blessed to have good written descriptions of those accounts from both of those people. And I was actually able to meet one of them before his book came out, and that was Leo Dvorak. And when I spoke with him the first time, he was a very suspicious of other people kind of guy, and a little bit prickly, kind of grilled me. I found out later that he'd actually been an interrogator in prisoner of war camps in World War II, so maybe that's where some of that came from. Yeah. So as I was asking him about the book that I had heard that he was working on, and hearing more about this, I told him, when the book comes out, I will help you market it. I will help you publicize it. And we had just had a bang-up job of getting that book splashed on the front page of the local paper, and had a meeting where we had him speaking alongside Jesse Marcel Jr., and we had 150 people come out at the Methodist Church, the fellowship hall, to hear these two guys talk about what they knew about. Yeah.
Huh. Wow, that's great. Now, have you ever had your own personal sighting of any kind?
I've seen lights. I had a significant sighting of a very large light. Didn't last real long, but I'm 95% sure that it was some kind of unusual craft, not a meteorite. And I've had lately a number of sightings of where you see very, very bright stars, and you watch them for a while to see if they're going to do anything interesting, and then all of a sudden they flash real bright and then disappear. I don't know if there's an atmospheric phenomenon, but another one of the books I read recently, Meet the Hybrids, the people that says that she's a hybrid says that's one of the ways that they are showing up these days, because our weapons have become so sophisticated that many of their craft are endangered by being in our atmosphere.
Yeah, I know. Stan Friedman says a lot, why haven't they shown themselves to us? Well, because of, our whole social system is based on tribal warfare. And, yeah, I can understand that. So let's talk a little bit about the sheriffs that you were involved, along with Richard O'Connor, in interviewing. Keith Wolverton, who you mentioned his name just a few minutes ago about a book that he'd written, and also Pete Howard.
Right.
How did you, first of all, did you meet them because of Keith's book, or how did you first get in touch with them?
I've known Keith since the early 1990s. There were some people in the Helena area that were working with policemen and intuitives and helping them solve mysteries in that way. And I knew some of these people locally and was interested. They were also interested in going out and visiting Native American sites and trying to understand what was happening there. So it was just kind of a local explorers group. And Keith was a friend of the researcher that was kind of in charge of that group. So I met him back then, got to know him, and when I was working on the book, I went up and interviewed him and talked to him at that time. And of course, his book is a very important book, and it's one of the first books that I read about UFOs. And actually, it's about cattle mutilations, but also about UFOs.
Yeah. I did watch part of that interview, and anyone can find that online. You just Google those two names. Search for those two names. And
Montana Sheriffs. If you search Montana Sheriffs, you'll get them.
That's right.
And then Pete Howard, I had heard about for a long time. I had been told for years that I needed to go meet Pete Howard, who had been the sheriff of Teton County for, I think he was sheriff for 7 years, and then he was the justice of the peace for like 30 years or something, a very long time, very highly regarded in the community. And I finally met him this year when I went up to speak in Shoto. And I just was so impressed with the man. He's so down to earth and so willing to talk about his experiences. And he did have one very good sighting where he chased a glowing object for, I think, most of an hour, and then got confirmation from this radar range that was, or this radar, what would you call it, a temporary radar facility for a bombing range north of Shoto, and he was in touch with those people and had gotten to know them socially. And so when he contacted them that night and asked them if they had anything on radar, they said, "You bet we do. Come on over and we'll show you." And he went over and saw these amazing radar tracings where they were getting these unbelievable jumps in altitude that were almost instantaneous. And the man that was in charge of the facility said he put 2 people on every radar station, every one of their radar sensors, just to keep track of what was going on because they just couldn't believe what they were seeing. And while they were looking at these amazing radar tracings, these guys knocked on the door, came in, or maybe they didn't knock on the door, I didn't know that part. And they had on black suits, and they were carrying tubes that looked like the ones that you carry fly fishing rods in. They came in, they confiscated all of the radar tracings. They told the commander in charge that he needed to get that sheriff out of there. And that was the end of that.
Now, how could they possibly get there that fast? That's just baffling. I mean,
it is baffling, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, is there a base? There's a base nearby, did you say?
Yeah, it's close to Malmstrom Air Force Base, but still, it's a ways away. And I don't know, they must have been hearing it over the phone, or maybe the radar tracings were showing up back at Malmstrom and they were seeing them. Maybe they had links so that people in the main Air Force Base could see what was happening at that temporary base. That's a good question.
Right. I mean, just the men in black, I suppose, or as close to them as possible. Yeah. And that particular sighting I did hear him talk about, which I thought was really quite amazing, and just another good case of something unexplainable. And what about Pete? Was it Pete Howard who told that story? What about some other stories that they, as sheriffs, that they were talking about? I mean, to me, I think policemen, sheriffs, any law individuals out there that have sightings, definitely think it adds some credibility. Some people will disagree with me about that, but I do think it adds credibility that they'll come forward and talk about it.
Yeah, I think so too. I know in Britain they actually have a database from law enforcement people about the sightings they've had, because they too are often out at night. I wish we had something like that in the U.S. Of course, there's a lot of well-known sightings that have been done by law enforcement people, the Socorro event and others. But I think that people do tend to respect what they have to say. And although they started out just looking at cattle mutilations, things just kept getting more and more interesting, and there were a lot of sightings associated with those mutilations.
Yeah.
And I think that Keith also had sightings too. It got pretty lively there when they were investigating. And this happened in 75 and 76. The book came out towards the end of 76. It was just a very hot time, and I was recently reading Whitley Strieber's last book, and he said that the 70s is when we had the most reports of abductions too, which I just thought was curious. I hadn't realized that before.
Really? So I was thinking that it was the last few years, for the most part of the country, that people are reporting abductions. So what's the level of that you're aware of? I mean, do you listen to any of that as well?
Yes, I do. I pay a lot of attention to it, and I actually, for a long time, I just didn't hear that, because people are, of course, even more afraid to talk about the fact that they've had contact or feel like they've been abducted than they are to talk about sightings. And the ridicule factor increases by probably a factor of 10 when you get into talking about abductions as compared to a sighting.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So I don't often get people who are willing to talk about it when I go out and speak. But what I found was that a number of the people who were coming to the UFO library on Tuesday nights here in Helena actually had experiences that made them think that they might be abducted. And that's the other thing, is a lot of people don't realize they have, but then they have had cases of missing time or cases of very close sightings that have left them with some strange feelings, or they think they've had dreams or whatever. So I think that we just get the tip of the iceberg, but I think it's a very widespread phenomenon, and certainly the letters that Whitley Strieber got to over 250,000 letters after he wrote Communion from people all over the country talking about their experiences. And then when John Mack started investigating it, I think that really helped legitimize the fact that this is something that is happening to a lot of people, and we don't have another explanation for it other than what people say.
Right, right. A good point up on the message board, because I have had Nancy Talbot on the show before, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. But what do you think, going back to the crop circles, because that was your first line of interest in this, what do you think they are? Do you have any type of guess or clue of what's going on with them?
Well, the first thing I need to say is that I think that an awful lot of the ones that are happening now are man-made, that the circle makers, the human circle makers, have become very adept. So I think it's become increasingly hard to discern what is human-made and what has another cause. But the early ones, I definitely felt like that it is communication, that it's messages. There was a native person that was looking at the crop circles up in Canada, north of Montana, that were happening around the same time as the ones in Montana. So I was kind of paying attention to what he was learning. And this native man went to his elders and asked them about it. And they said, they are messages. They are messages, and we need to be paying attention to them. It just seems like some of the ones that have happened in England are fairly clear messages. The one of the Bolton, the one that looks like an ET.
Oh, yes.
And has the disc.
Right.
And there are several others that have been translated that were fairly easy to decipher. And then there are so many that have these underlying geometrical properties that unless you analyze them and look at the geometries, that there is so much more going on and so much more sophistication in the imagery than we have understood. And mathematics is kind of a universal language. In fact, there are people that say that they have found new Euclidean geometric proofs in the crop circles. So, I think that it's a communication, and it sort of astounds me that it has not gotten more attention than it has.
Yeah. I think the fact that the waters are muddied, so to speak, by what you just mentioned earlier, so many human-made. I know they tested a group in England and to do it exactly how they would do it in the dark, and they did a pretty good darn job of doing something very geometrically difficult to do, all by measurements and the paddles on their feet and all that. So I believe you're right. I do believe a lot of them are man-made. But some of them, someone just wrote a second ago about the exploded nodes. I remember Nancy talking about something changed physically in the growth of the plants themselves as well as the soil. Right.
Yeah. Some of the things that they find in the crop circle formations are the elongated nodes with expulsion cavities with holes in them that seem to be blown by some kind of superheating or microwave heating. And also some other anomalies in the plants, including holes in the cell walls, which has to be determined by microscopic inspection. But there has been some doubt cast on some of those early scientific analyses of the plants, and I think that that it's worth paying attention to. Colin Andrews was trying to do a double-blind study and actually got some mixed results from one of their primary researchers, Dr. Levengood. However, the clay mineralization studies, which were done in a crop circle from 1999 in, I think it was Saskatchewan or Alberta, one of those, there was a study done that was funded by Lawrence Rockefeller. And that study, I think, is an incredibly impressive study that looks at the changes in the soil and specifically the crystallization of the clay particles. And what they found was that the clay particles within the crop circle were the soil itself showed much more of this crystallization of the clay particles as compared to soil samples taken outside of the circle. And they found an extremely high correlation between that crystallization of the soil sample and the plants, the elongation of the nodes, which was another characteristic. So that those had a 99% correlation. But what particularly impressed me about this crystallization in the soils is that there's only two ways that we know of that you can do it, and one is by heating it incredibly hot. I think I was reading that information today, and I think it has to be like 500 to 800 degrees centigrade in order to get that kind of crystallization, the kind of heat that you get in a kiln when you fire pottery. Mm-hmm. Now that's how you turn that slimy clay stuff into stuff that's brittle and hard and makes pottery and stoneware, is a crystallization process that's created by heat. And the other way you get it is by enormous geological pressure. So here we have this crystallization process happening in a place where there are plants that are still living after it's done. So it's not being subjected to tremendous amounts of heat, or the plants would all be fried. And you can't have that kind of geological pressure when you're, it's not happening. So when they gave the results of the experiment to a man who is probably one of the world's foremost experts on clay mineralization and the kinds of techniques that you use to determine that, what he said was that he just really could not come up with an explanation for what kind of energy could cause the crystallization and not harm the plants, that was a form of energy that was unknown to science.
Is there any type of natural way that the nodes could be broken open as they are?
With the holes in them?
Yes.
I think if you put them in the microwave, that you can mimic that effect.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, that's something else. Okay. There was a question someone wanted to know, have you ever heard of the theory about changes to the timeline? That's what communicated through crop circles.
I don't know about that. I think it's an interesting theory, but I don't know what specific crop circle they might be referring to, or who has, or what the source is.
Okay. A question that I thought of, now this is going kind of way out there, but I wonder, has anyone reported genetically modified crops as crop circles in them? Do you happen to know that?
I don't know.
I don't know if anyone's ever asked that question before.
Yeah.
That's what they should be doing crop circles in.
I'm guessing that there have been. And I think that Jeffrey Wilson's site, he's probably the best researcher in North America, and he has spent a lot of time looking at crop circles and knows more about the crop circles that have happened in North America than anybody. And so just given how widespread GMOs are in a lot of our crops, and I think that it's probably, it could happen. Although I'm not sure about wheat, which is one of the main ones, wheat and barley and cereal crops, oats. I don't know how common GMOs are in those crops.
Yeah. Well,
highly likely.
Do the crop circles, they happen in cornfields, right?
I think there have been some in cornfields. It's a little bit more,
clunky?
Not going to be as precise of work. Yeah. I don't know. Actually, I don't know that, actually what they call them, I think that corn may be a blanket term that is sometimes used that may not actually be corn, maybe something else. So I don't know. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
It would be very hard to lay down corn.
Yes, I would think so. Now, and I know there's some early crop circles, which is rather intriguing. There's some pictures of some very early ones.
Yes.
I think it's all another very interesting topic. Someone put a question up there that I know you don't want to talk about cattle mutilations, but are you aware of any cattle mutilations near crop circles? That is a unusual and very good question, actually.
That question just came up for me last weekend, and I am not. I don't know of any crop circles near cattle mutilations. I've never heard of that. There are UFO sightings around cattle mutilations, and there are UFO sightings around crop circles. And some of those sightings might have been similar, but as far as I know, there is no connection there. It seems to be the case that crop circles only occur in places where there is some kind of a water source, usually a high aquifer, a high water table, an aquifer that underlies the area. Jeffrey Wilson, again, he's looked at this, and he says he also often finds power lines in the vicinity. But there seems to need to be some kind of water. So a lot of the wheat fields that you find are, especially in Montana, are dryland wheat fields that they don't irrigate them. And they can be very dry. So we don't know of any crop circles that have happened in all of there's probably, millions of acres of wheat in Montana, in eastern Montana. But where the crop circles happened in Montana was in northwestern Montana, which is just wet anyway, but significantly in the Kalispell area north of Flathead Lake. And the Flathead River runs really underground and throughout the Flathead Valley. So the whole Flathead Valley has a very high water table. The water is actually moving underneath the surface of the earth there. So that does make it similar to southern England, which has these limestone formations and these aquifers that are close to the surface there as well. So that may be a prerequisite for the formation of the crop circles.
Are you aware of the commonalities between American crop circles and European or English crop circles, and besides the man-made ones, that is?
Well,
I mean, do they have water and aquifers? And well, you sort of said they did, but I'm just wondering if there's anything else that are similar aspects.
Other than that, they find the same kinds of elongated nodes and these soil changes and the electromagnetic effects, the draining of batteries when technical equipment is taken into them. That certainly happened in the Montana crop circles, and it's one of the signatures of a lot of the British crop circles.
Yeah, interesting.
But in terms of the messages or the shapes, actually, there's one of the Montana crop circles is very similar in design to one of the British crop circles, and I put a picture of the British crop circle in my book because they were so similar, kind of a spinning-looking image. And there'd been a nice analysis done of it by Bert Jansen, who's a Dutch guy that does a lot of the mathematical analyses looking at the underlying geometries. So I used it. So I don't know how many of them are similar. It seems that another thing we have going on in North America is that there seems to be connections with some of the significant indigenous sites, Native American sites like Serpent Mound. There were, it seems like when Jeffrey Wilson analyzed some of the crop circles, they seem to be pointing at have vectors that were indicating the Serpent Mound, which was in the near vicinity.
Wow. So what is the Native American culture like in Montana as far as UFOs and legends and things like that? Are you aware?
Goodness. Well, that's a good question. But the person who is the best to talk about that is, of course, Artie Six-Killer Clark. And I noticed that you had her on your show. And she has a new book out and is doing a lot more interviews also. But her book just blew me away. I had a little bit of information. I had a person who told me about a cattle mutilation that happened in 1947 north of Browning. And this person is half Blackfeet and half Oneida. And he was 8 years old at the time, I believe. His mother was teaching at a school north of Browning, which is the main capital and the tribal headquarters for the Blackfeet Nation. And what he said was that he was awakened early in the morning by some of his school friends telling him to come see. And they found a dead cow with its lips gone and, the normal thing, missing parts. And as they were sitting there gawking at it and trying to figure out what's going on, that this elder strode up and talked to them and said that, yes, he'd seen lights, hovering over a nearby butte that night, and he'd actually seen them.
Wow, 1947.
1947, draw up a cow and drop it. Oh. And this witness said that as they were looking at it, that there was the dust, it was very dusty and dry, and the dust had kind of splayed out around the body of the cow, and that somebody, dropped a rock or threw a rock towards the dust, and it did the same thing. It kind of made a splash in the dust. And that's what they were seeing around the cow also, was this kind of a splash effect around the edge of it. And over time, he said this elder came back to him and talked to him more about sightings, many sightings that the elder had had when he was a boy, which must have been in the early 1900s. And what he said was that they called them sky boats, and that there were 3 different types of beings that they recognized. And the first ones were small, and they wore clothing that was soft but looked like metal. And another ones were tall and blonde and blue-eyed, like many people describe Nordics.
Yep.
But another group were tall and dark-haired and brown-skinned like them. And then he went on to talk about a creation story that actually talked about Natosi, the Black Sea creator, coming from another planet. So I don't know how well that is known in Black Sea traditional culture, because it's something that is not shared with people that are not members of the tribe in general. But I also wonder if some of that is lost, because I know that when Artie Six-Pillar Clark was collecting her stories, she also ran into a lot of people that didn't want to talk about it. Although in general, I think that the Native American people are just more open to things that can't be explained by a scientific materialistic worldview. I think that they live in a more numinous, more spiritual reality. And so there are a lot of things that they report that we don't have explanations for. And in general, I think that they are just more knowledgeable about multidimensional realities than Western European culture tends to be.
Yeah. Well, they've explained things through many, many generations in different ways than, where we were more advanced as a society. What I'm getting at is they had, before we even arrived here, the Pilgrims arrived here, they had been explaining things for, passed down oral tradition, oral history for generations and generations. And so many things you can't explain anyway. You can understand how they could come up with these stories, but some of them are so interesting when they're in parallel with things that are known to happen, like sightings and the cattle mutilation you just spoke about, and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that Artie's contribution is very important, even though these are anonymous stories. And, the skeptics will call them anecdotal. But I do believe that when you start collecting this information and you get stories that are similar over time, perhaps going back hundreds of years, that it starts becoming data rather than just anecdotal, when you start getting that kind of similarity. And she came up with stories that I think are significant contributions to the contactee literature because of the types of things that she described, including a number of crashes and ETs that were left here and then walked among us, are able to pass as human. And that is being reported at other places as well, but I thought that some of her stories were particularly amazing in that perspective.
Yeah, Artie was on, I don't know, maybe a year and a half ago, and she did send me an email when she came out with her new book. I'm already booked into November. I can't even believe that. So, we might get her back on. Let's see, a couple of questions. What's the strangest thing that you've encountered in ufology that you believe could be credible?
Well, okay. I always have
It's just an
trouble
opinion.
Yeah, I always have trouble with the strangest thing, because there's so many. It's hard to sort it all out. But that story that Artie talks about meeting this woman who says that she was an ET who only needed 3 hours of sleep and had a lot of other unusual physical characteristics, that was pretty far out there. That was pretty amazing. It makes me keep a radar out for people that are a little bit different, and kind of wonder just how different they are, and because I do think they are walking among us. So that's something that changes how you think about people when you're just out there looking at crowds or at UFO conferences, especially. And we do have a story in Montana of a man who says that he was from the Alpha Centauri system back in the early 50s, at the same time that we had George Adamski and some of the other early contactees talking about contact with the Space Brothers. And it's a very interesting story, and there are a number of people that knew this man who evidently worked for a driller, a water driller, in Anaconda for about 6 weeks one summer. And he said that he was from a planet that was drying up. So he knew a lot about drilling. And I had one secondhand account of somebody from another driller, the one that had originally hired this guy that said he was from Alpha Centauri was gone. He was no longer living when I first heard about the case. But there was another driller in the area that had worked for him and said that they had learned a particular kind of way to shape or cut where the water comes in at the base of the well. I don't know what you call that, but the shaft, when it goes down, it tends to silt in, and that's a problem for drillers. So they have to figure out ways to keep the water flowing and not be messed up by silting in. And this man that worked for them, he had a way of doing that, a way of shaping that intake area so that the water, so that it didn't get clogged, so that it didn't fill, and shared this technique with the man that he was working for, who then shared it with other people that worked for him after that. And I have tried to track that down to see if I can find the original person, and I'm afraid he's also passed on now too. But I just think that's interesting that there may be pieces of wisdom that have made it into our culture via not just ideas maybe that are planted in people's heads, but maybe actually from beings that are walking around on the planet and sharing some of what they know.
It seemed one of the things that you hear, skeptics or just someone, trying to look at it logically is, and it's kind of the same thing with UFOs too, is how come there's not any proof that these beings are walking around? How come, if they're actually integrated into our society, how come it's not known about more and pointed out? I saw the the hybrids out in Phoenix, and I have to tell you, I wasn't really sold on that myself, but that's just one person's opinion. I did listen to them all, and with interest, but unfortunately, I just wasn't buying it, and I hate to say it because it was so popular at that conference. I mean, I would say they got the most applauses and all that, but I just didn't feel it. I don't know. Maybe I should be more open-minded about it. But so, what do you say to someone like your brother that would say, what possible proof do you have that these people are among us?
Well, I don't know of any so far yet. I do know that some of those people that said that they were hybrids do have some unusual physiological characteristics. And if they are, in fact, hybrids, I would hope that we would begin to be able to document some of those physiological differences. I mean, you hear things about lower body temperature maybe either an extra or one less vertebra. Some things, but one of the problems is, including with the elongated skulls, that there is so much natural variation, and there are a number of people that are looking at that and working on it. But there's a woman that has done a really good work on the elongated skulls. Her name is eluding me at the moment. But as she pointed out, there is so much natural variation in the shape and the size of human skulls that it's really hard to know if something is just from the physical measurements, if it is not human, that we really have to have the genetic testing. And that is being done. That is happening.
Yeah, that seemed like a pretty basic thing to have checked out. That was one of the questions I had on that whole situation.
Right. I hope that they will follow up and do that. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to see that happen. Let's see. Simulation theory. What's your opinion on that? That's another question.
Simulation. I'm sorry, I'm not tracking what's simulation theory.
Okay. This guy asked like 20 times for me to ask you that. I think it's a theory about that we're not in a reality. I believe that's what it is.
Okay. Kind of like the Matrix.
Yes.
Kind of like the Matrix. I think it's a very interesting theory. And the book that I'm reading now, Whitley Strieber's and Jeffrey Creek Paul's book, which is called The Supernatural, talks about the extent to which we are conditioned, programmed by the culture that we grew up in, the language that we speak. It's amazing how much information is embedded just in the languages that we speak about the nature of reality. I've had Native American people talk to me about this and say, that a Blackfeet man say, you have first, second, and third person in English. He said, we also have fourth and fifth person. He said, I don't have any way I can translate that for you. And he said, not only that, but we have so many more words for the spiritual and the sacred, and that the English is so depauperate of that kind of lexicon. And then you have people talking about how native languages tend to be non-dualistic, whereas English and Greek are very dualistic. And that these native languages are much more metaphorical. That, for instance, the Aramaic language, you translate the Lord's Prayer and you say, give us this day our daily bread. In the Aramaic, that would not mean just bread that you eat. That would mean whatever you need for your sustenance, which could be information, could be spiritual food as well as physical food. So languages really affect our understanding of what's real. So we all undergo this kind of conditioning and programming, and that impacts what we perceive. It affects our perceptions. And this is not quite, I think, what he may be talking about simulation, of whether we are, this is all just something that has been foisted on us by some controllers outside of us. But it does say something about how cautious we need to be about trusting our perceptions and trying to understand what's beyond them, because our perceptions, this is what science uses. We use our perceptual skills to try to understand what's real. And yet we have learned that our perception only covers a very narrow band of the light spectrum for our visual senses. Our auditory senses only cover a very narrow band. Once we begin to realize how limited we are and what we are able to perceive about what is around us, and we realize that there's a lot out there that we're probably not perceiving.
Just brought that up in the last show. That exact same thing.
Yeah. So it's something that I think is important, to think about. And a lot of scientists think they can be objective. And I've always thought that was lacking in humility, not to mention an understanding of the psychology of perception and how much our beliefs and our thinking affect what we see.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or perceive.
Yeah, all things to ponder. I have a very long question for you that was emailed in, so bear with me. have you heard of the Muhammad Accord, so named not because of anything to do with Muhammad, but because it was enacted during that time period? This is supposedly a sort of treaty among various ET groups not to openly interact with humans from that time forward as much as they had interacted previously, although it doesn't permit covert interference. Supposedly, there are efforts underway to renegotiate this agreement among those original ET signatory groups to permit more open interaction, but some are resisting renegotiation. Any thoughts on whether there could be any truth to this claim?
I have not heard of this. What's the source?
I haven't
do you know?
either. No.
Okay, but I do have a couple of comments.
Okay.
One is that there are two channeled accounts, one with a group called the Hathors and another with a group called Ra, who both say that at times they were involved with humans on the planet where they directly appeared and tried to assist us. And what they found was that it didn't work, that they were worshipped as gods, and so they just realized that that was not, that humans had to kind of go it on their own. And then you have the whole prime directive that Star Trek talks about. And and that's very interesting too, because Gene Roddenberry sat in on some sessions of channeling that was done, trance channeling that was done by a woman named Phyllis Schlemmer. And there's a very interesting book by Stuart Holroyd, who was skeptical, but he happened to be around kind of from the beginning of when she started doing this work. And she was somebody who was very psychic. She saw her grandfather after he died at the funeral when she was 4 years old and didn't understand what everybody was crying about. And she taught classes in intuition and developing your psychic abilities. But what happened when she started working with this Council of Nine was a much deeper level of trance channel, and she was working with Andrea Puharich, who also was involved with the spoon bending guy.
Yuri Geller.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he had always been interested in investigating things, and he started working with her, and they had to create very careful, safe space, and it wasn't always possible for her to develop that connection. But she started trans-channeling information from this group that called themselves the Nine. And Stuart Holroyd writes about that in this book, Briefing from Deep Space. And I heard that Gene Roddenberry actually sat in on a number of those sessions, and that in those sessions they talk about the Prime Directive. They talk about the fact that they are not allowed to interfere with the evolution of intelligent species on a planet like Earth. That those beings have free will, and that they have to respect that.
Yeah,
so,
that's interesting. You did kind of see that in Star Trek as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, and according to, I think it was Stuart Holroyd who talked about this, a lot of the information in Star Trek came from this channeled information through Phyllis Schlemmer and the Council of Nine. So I read this stuff and I don't know what to make of it, but it's like, it's part of the information that I keep, and I keep it in my hold basket.
Yeah, that's a good place for it.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah. But it's all, I'm glad, that I'm speaking to someone that is involved in science and also open-minded. I wish there were more people like that. Because I do think with a closed mind, it just restricts moving forward in a lot of ways. Not always, of course, but in a number of ways.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I talk about when I speak is that this subject, when I wrote the book, not just to lift the lid on the whole UFO phenomenon, which was certainly part of the reason that I wrote it, but I also feel that we are in the process of a major paradigm shift in our understanding of the nature of reality, and that the UFO phenomenon is a part of that, that it is not easily explained by a scientific materialistic worldview. In fact, it can't be explained by a scientific materialistic worldview. That it raises so many questions about the nature of reality that it really makes us have to reassess a lot of the things that we have assumed in the past. So for many academic scientists who are steeped in that scientific materialistic worldview, they can't. To acknowledge this is to challenge everything that they know.
That's
so
right.
They kind of sense that they can't go into this territory. But I'm totally fascinated when I look at the literature and the history of some of the people that I think of as some of the great researchers in ufology talking about this. And Jacques Vallée was one of them. In fact, he upset a lot of people because he started talking about this being an extra-dimensional phenomenon instead of an extraterrestrial one, and wasn't at all sure that they were coming from off-planet, that they weren't just coming from another dimension.
Yeah, Joan, we're out of time. And
oh, goodness.
Yeah, I know, that went fast. So MontanaUFOs.com is Joan's website, and I want to thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Likewise, Martin, thank you for having me on. I've enjoyed the time, too.
Very good. All right. So thanks a lot, everyone, for listening. And if you're listening now, you're supporting the show, so I do really appreciate that. And thanks for hanging out in the message board as well. And we'll be back next week with Grant Cameron. I want to thank Peggy Shunning for managing the Facebook page, Carrie Lloyd Whitehouse for the music. And that's it for us this week. Remember to keep your eyes to the sky.